That kind of touches on that concept of the personal fat threshold that Ted Naiman has been talking about for a few years. And, like I said, that's why some people say, well, we see these folks in East India, that are relatively not very obese, but yet they're metabolically floating around with a ton of energy in their blood, and for some reason, is there a genetic component to that? Probably to some degree, I would imagine, but maybe some of the dietary patterns make that as well. Maybe because they're under protein, at least in America, protein's not hard to come by, and so we have, I don't think we have a protein deficiency availability. It's there. I think many people just overeat the other garbage on top of that, which is a problem. But if you go to places like India, where you've got a high vegetarian population, probably they have a relatively per capita lower protein consumption or bioavailable protein. I don't think they're getting as much from the beans and maybe some from the dairy. Dairy is actually a pretty good source of protein, but it might be an interesting just thought, protein, energy, and those types of diets, and where the personal fat threshold in, or is it purely genetic? I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you'd imagine there's some people like the Pacific Islanders who might do a whole lot better if, they got to those Pacific Islands by rowing for days and weeks, and the fatter ones, at the start survived the journey and made it to the island. So you can imagine there's different indigenous populations where being able to build a lot of fat before you become diabetic is really advantageous, but other populations definitely seem to have a lower fat threshold, that they can only gain so much weight, so much fat on their body before it starts to spill over into the bloodstream and they become metabolically deranged. It's
almost kind of the physiology of a bear, perhaps, going for hibernation. I don't think bears are diabetic. I think they tolerate that pretty well. They put on they gorge and then they hang out for however many months, something like that. Yeah, I guess, and you've probably seen there's some evolutionary thoughts that insulin resistance was advantageous for certain populations, and particularly around the ice ages when we didn't have a lot of access to carbohydrates, and therefore it was probably beneficial to shunt glucose away from some tissues towards others, and so on and so forth, perhaps.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So I'm trying to get some of the takeaways from this, Marty. I don't want to keep you too long. We usually do this about an hour, so if we look at optimal health, which I think is still a very difficult term to define, whatever you're eating, as long as it produces leanness, I'd say adequate muscle, it's probably in general okay. And of course, there's always going to be some edge cases, some people that need the elimination diets, have the certain disease conditions that require. And have you seen? I guess I should ask you this. So certain diseases, do you see different needs? Does it exacerbate the need for something else? Does it change things? So say somebody has Crohn's disease. I don't know if you get into this. Obviously, there may be wasting, or maybe if they have depression, maybe they need more of this or more of that. Have you been able to look into that at all?
Yeah, I suppose we've dove into cancer and a bunch of different, looking at low oxalate diets and low FODMAP diets, and people who have those conditions have different micronutrient requirements. But I don't think that's the majority of the population. There's definitely a need for people who have those issues and sensitivities. But I think, 90 to 99% of people just need nutrients without excess energy. And the first lever is protein, to get enough protein. And there's so much debate in the carnivore versus, Ted Naiman's high protein versus, other people who want to keep eating tons of fat and avoid protein because they get too full on it. And, you just need to find, where are you now? If you're a bit over fat, you need to go from, where you are now to add another 5% protein and dial back the energy from fat and carbs and find that balance point that works for you. And from there, once you've got that balance point, it's like, okay, what other micronutrients might you need to chase that might add to that? And where can you get that in your dietary perspective? And if you're following a vegan diet, it's probably going to be hard to get a bunch of those nutrients, especially protein. And if you're a strict carnivore, it might be harder, but you can chase the organ meats and the like just to top those nutrients off potentially if you want to go for optimal.
Do you see any, we talked about protein, the macronutrients, and you've talked quite a bit about micronutrients in general. Do you see like, some people, I'm just craving this, I'm craving something. Do you ever see like, is there a nutrient that like, like obviously you want to, let's say we want to get whatever. I like a pound per gram, a gram per pound of body weight of protein is a nice place for me to be. Sometimes I'll exceed that. Usually I exceed that, quite honestly. But when it comes to like, you're saying, well, I'm still hungry. And you said, well, maybe protein, you hit your protein requirements clearly and you're still hungry. What else is there? I mean, is it just, I want some carbs or fat, or is there like, maybe I need some magnesium? Maybe I need, do you see that? Do you see a common one that's often missed?
Yeah, I mean, all of the above. Definitely once you hit your protein requirement, you're then craving energy to get enough energy because you can't make ATP from protein very easily. And there's a lot of work for your body to do that. So it then goes, give me the fat or carbs. If your glucose is low, you'll be craving carbs rather than fat potentially. But there's definitely a similar micronutrient leverage effect where people are craving certain micronutrients. And we see in our micros masterclass when people dial in all those harder to find micronutrients in their diet, they're just going, I've lost interest in food. I'm satisfied and I'm comfortably satisfied. And it's like people have said, I'm satisfied at a cellular level now. And that's a really beautiful thing. I think that you're no longer addicted to food. You've got the nutrients you need from the food you're eating.
Yeah. I kind of like 5 or 6 years ago when I was first on Twitter and I was kind of just waking up to some of this stuff, I'd been looking at nutrition for several years. I just kind of said, hey, if you're, I was talking about fasting and I said, if your diet should probably naturally lend itself, if you're getting the nutrients you need, then your appetite will follow. That's kind of a rudimentary thing, what you were talking about. But I was like, maybe we eat to get the nutrition we need, which would make sense. I mean, that would make the most sense, right? Why are we hungry? Why are you hungry in the first place? Well, because you need something, right? I mean, unfortunately, we're given the things we don't need in many cases. We're given these
and told to fear all these boogeymen in their food, like the saturated fat and cholesterol and salt, and all these things seem to be beneficial largely.
I wanted to, just you said the master class on nutrition, and I want you to share where people can go on that in a second. But I'm just curious, because I do see people say, hey, I ate friggin' 4 pounds of ribeye, man. I'm still hungry, dude. What do I do? And I'm trying to think, well, these are things you can do to take your mind off your appetite. And there's things that clearly suppress satiety. High intensity exercise shuts down appetite and has an anorexic effect. You could stretch things out. You can go for a walk, whatever. I mean, but is there like, I could say, well, maybe just pop a multivitamin, dude. Obviously I don't know how that works, as far as, rapid absorption.
Multivitamins,
garbage,
supplemental nutrients, just don't eat synthetic isolated.
Yeah, I get it. I'm saying ingest, but I'm just thinking, where can you, like I said, I'm just wondering what are the most common things. Is it magnesium that people are usually like falling short on?
Yeah, definitely. We see a massive, satiety response to protein is number one, but then potassium, cholesterol, folate, calcium, niacin. A lot of these are statistically significant from our analysis that people do seem to have a particular micronutrient leverage effect from those nutrients. But I mean, on a carnivore diet, I don't know, you can create glucose from protein, but maybe if your glucose is low, maybe you're craving carbs, maybe craving fat as the highest priority. And especially if you've jumped, like I said, from a low protein percentage to a high protein percentage overnight and you're not adapting to that well, you're probably craving more energy from fat or carbs, especially if you're active. But yeah, then the other, on top of that, it's the other micronutrients.
Do you think that diabetics have a lower protein requirement than non-diabetics as far as blood glucose regulation, either type 1 or type 2?
I think potentially, I mean, if you look at Rubbenheimer and Simpson's obesity leverage hypothesis, they made a really good point that the protein requirements are going up because we're becoming insulin resistant. And when we become insulin resistant, more of the protein you're eating is being lost to glucose through gluconeogenesis. So we're actually having to eat more protein. So the more risk you are of having high glucose, you actually need more protein. So it's the opposite of what a lot of the keto gurus have been preaching for the last 5 years. It's, don't avoid protein if you're diabetic. Actually prioritize protein, which will help with satiety and make up for the protein being lost to glucose.